We're ready?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, everyone, welcome. The Citizen Budget Committee, Mayor, welcome. Glad to have you here. Councilmember Pulver, glad to have you here. John, Dave, Ryan, Katie, glad to have you here from the various departments. We'll start with a Pledge of Allegiance thought or invocation, and Mike has graciously accepted the assignment for today.
So my thought is that as a group, we continue to come up with the valuable ideas that we have thus far, continue that, and be mindful of everybody's thoughts and wishes as we do that.
Awesome.
Okay, follow me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
What do you want?
Agenda.
Anybody need an agenda? Mike? Andy?
No.
Good. Okay, good. Excuse me, let's go right then to item number 1, comments and questions from the review of utility fees, transportation utility fee, and salary study. I'll turn time over to John.
Okay.
Are you going to take them in that order, John?
We can take them in any order the group wants to take them.
Is there a preference in the order you'd like to take these? Okay, we'll just do it in the order that you've got them there.
Okay. I need an agenda to make sure I follow your order then.
See how you are.
Okay, so the initial review of utility fees is something that we dance with all season long because there's a lot of things that have to happen and get put in place before we know what those final numbers are going to be. The initial indication is that utility fees are going to increase $5, $4.50, something like that. And some of that is what we call a pass-through. So Weber Basin or Weber Sewer District is saying, hey, we are increasing our fees to the cities. And so we have to pay for it. We can either use fund balance to pay for it, or we basically break it down and say, it's this much per month divided across 7,200 accounts. And that's what we do. So that's one of the areas that we're likely going to see $1. Sorry, I was preparing, my computer's not working.
I think that's about $2.30.
That's what I was trying to pull up. This computer's frozen, so that's fun. Yeah, so it has broken down, or it's the majority of the increase.
Sewer.
Yeah.
So the sewer's 230, but the increase is 450.
Yeah. So then there's a little bit in there that comes in for salary increases in water, sewer, and solid waste. There is also in solid waste an increase of 4%. That's part of our contract with Republic Services. The way our contract is written is we pay CPI for the trash index for our area, but it's capped at 4%. And so I think the CPI for the past several years has been 6%, 7%, but we're capped at 4%. So that'll be part of the increase, is for the.
Do they have a fuel surcharge on top of that, or is that all inclusive?
There is a fuel surcharge. We are maxed out at that as well. So there is a cap on the amount they can charge for fuel. And that is essentially capped now as well. So we have 1 year left on that contract. We anticipate next year that we will see a significant increase in our tipping out, and then in our collection fees, our gas, and then tipping also has gone up at the county. So the majority of the increases are in your sewer and your solid waste that contribute to that 450. And then there's roughly $1 coming in for storm and water stuff. The nice thing about both of those is those are entirely internal. And the council really controls the budget a lot more. There's no outside input on those.
Are those itemized, and can they be? I haven't looked at my utility bill for years, but. I mean,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can. fact, if I can,
I mean,
I
if
was-
we're gonna do an increase and we say it's a pass-through sewer district, that should minimize.
yeah. So I was trying to, pull up the email. If I can remember my password. So I could give you those, but essentially the utilities are broken apart into the component, which is the base fee, which basically covers the pipes in the ground. And then what we call the usage fee, which is typically based on how much you're using it. Some of those don't have a usage fee, in the sense that stormwater, we don't measure stormwater, so we don't know how much people are using. But water and sewer, both, we know how much water goes into the house, and so they're both regulated based on that water meter flow. Because typically the water that goes in goes out. And then trash is based on the number of cans you have. So there is a rate that says, for $10 a month, you get these 2 cans. If you add a third can, then it's this much more a month. And if you add a third blue can, it's this much more a month. And so that the usage fee is a little different there.
The sanitary is set based off of the discussion that you had with us.
Yeah,
Based off a home buy-in.
yeah, assessed value of population.
I looked on Far West website and they had a huge bond that they're putting out there for sewer. It was like,
For what?
The city?
yeah,
So they've had some issues in their city with their lines not being big enough, or they're having some inflow. So infiltration is when groundwater gets into the sewer and fills up the pipes. Inflow is when people are pumping their sump pumps in. And so they have both of those problems out there. And
And then there's just one other factor for them is that they out there, because they're on the flats, they have some called lift stations. And so where elevations, they might have to take it from a certain part of the town, use a lift station to pump that sewer back to where one of Central Weaver's main sewer lines are. And so they get those kind of, those issues out there where, because it's so flat, where we're really lucky that we get to use the gravity, off the hill to leave our city.
Did their bond say what it was for though? It's
I didn't read
infrastructure.
through it all the way. I just was scanning through looking for some other stuff out there on the retail development and saw that one. It was like 30 or 40 million. Wow. It was huge. So I wondered if they were doing something else.
underground work has become very expensive. Sewer's the deepest utility. And it is extremely expensive. And out there they fight water, so they have to dewater during the entire project. And there's a lot of issues that drive up the cost. Again, to Dave's point, we've been really heavily focusing in our city on relining our concrete pipes. And I think we've talked about it before, but I did send that depreciation schedule like right before you walked in, but it can extend the life of those concrete pipes to 100 years, where we used to have it on a 50-year schedule. Because it basically provides a new membrane inside that's a brand new plastic pipe. If you've heard of bursting, it's not the same process because you're not breaking the concrete, but you're essentially using the concrete as an exoskeleton.
So it's the CFP process.
Yeah. And it's been, we feel like it's been really successful. But those are the real big highlights on utility rates. Again, the council's going to talk about them in detail in 2 weeks. And before then, we will send this group and the council a breakdown of, based on where it's at today, here's the numbers per utility. Water's going to be this much a month with a 25-cent increase, and sewer will be this much with $1.25 or whatever. I just didn't have that prepared for the group
In
today.
water, are we increasing the usage rates or just the base rate?
It'll just be the base rate.
Just the base rate.
And that's something that actually might be good for this group to talk about at some point, is this philosophy on what does the base rate cover, what does the pump rate cover? Because in water, it's kind of easy to be like, hey, base rate covers the people and what's in the ground, and then the usage rate covers the pumping fees. So a bunch of our water we pull out of the ground through pumps. Some of it comes gravity out of the mountains. But all of it has to be moved around the city. And so that's where the usage fee typically comes in, you know, that $1.75 a 1,000 gallons. But anyways, and then it goes based on your first 3,000 gallons is this much, and it goes up by $1 for the next 1,000, or really $1 per 1,000 for the next 3,000, and it just creeps up to help encourage conservation.
Do the connection fees offset any of the utility costs?
The connection fees offset the equipment that we install, so like the meters. And then it also offsets our time to inspect while they dig it up and clamp into the main. So those are the things the connection fees pay for.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they're kind of one-time money. The part of the base fee goes into the money that we save and set aside to replace meters. I know when we talked about the 5-year capital project for water, especially, in years 3, 4, and 5, we have to go through and replace all the meters in the city because they're 15 years old and they break. That's about their useful life. And so we know it's coming and we just plan for it. And that's part of, call it 5 cents a month or 20 cents a month is collected and saved for when the meter needs to be replaced.
And then have you settled on the connection fee for water yet? Because that one was still up in the air.
No, the impact fee for water, our engineer and the consulting engineers haven't dialed it in yet. So right now, if we adopted it, it would go into effect August 1st. But it's more likely going to be in September, October, just based on the timing.
Does staff feel like on the water that the usage fees are covering what they should? Or am I hearing in your suggestion to discuss it that you think the base rate is covering things that usage fees ought to cover?
I guess it's a philosophy question, like that I know we've been talking a lot of philosophy the last couple of days, but in all seriousness, I really do think that is something that we do need to nail down and say, you know, if we're working on PRVs, in my mind, that should be on the usage fee, right?
The usage fee, right?
Correct. Or if we're doing, you know, a mainline project, like, because we're replacing the whole thing and we've dedicated the guys and the pipe in the ground, like, that should go to the base, right? Like, so I do think we probably do need to nail out that a little bit better. I think it would help the citizens understand exactly where their dollars are going, when we do an increase like that. That, you know, if we do it to the base rate, it's because, you know, salaries went up or we decided to do a water line project. But if we have, you know, what was it, 3 years ago when we did $400,000 worth of PRV maintenance? It's
Right.
like, a lot of that was contributed to why we did the tiered rates and those kind of things. And so it would be good to nail that down and show that that's towards that usage.
Okay. Thoughts?
You may find the base fees not covering it with that new water tank.
Yeah.
That was a $3 million deal, and that's what caused the increase in water rates last year, the depreciation on the water tank.
Correct.
Was that tank installed to handle the growth that's anticipated over there?
Yeah, so we were able to use some impact fees for that, because we could prove the growth. And so it was.
We used ARPA fees.
We used mostly ARPA fees, yes.
Yeah, it was there because really we didn't have enough water to meet standards for firefighting down in that part of the city.
Correct.
We didn't have enough water with the development,
With the density that
was taking place to if there was a fire down there, I guess there was what they call it, entitled or something like that. I mean, there just wasn't enough water to handle the needs of all the developments going in that part of the city. But everybody's paying for that tank because it's in the base, even though it had to be done for that part of the city.
Right, everybody's paying for it.
I got kind of a follow-up question to what you said, Mayor. Is water going to restrict development, dealing with the secondary water? Secondary water is going to restrict development. With culinary water, do we have tons of water? It sounds like.
That's what they say, we have tons of water, but my understanding is you can't approve a subdivision in the city without secondary water.
That's correct.
So that, even though there might be plenty of culinary water,
That's my question. Though. Do we have plenty of culinary water? So
that's
I'm
what
asking.
the last study showed.
Okay.
Our
Well,
our
we're updating.
water rights are fairly senior. So they are old water rights that we bought from the old farmers. And we should be good for the growth that we need.
We're just curious that, but if you said there's, there wasn't enough water pressure down there, is that a supply issue or is it just a pumping pressure raising issue?
So when we're talking, it wasn't a water pressure issue in the south end, it was the fire flow storage. So for every house, you have to have 400 gallons of fire flow. And so we didn't have that 500,000 gallon tank we had surpassed the capacity for fire flow for the number of units that were attached to it.
Okay.
And so now with the 2 million gallon tank, we've got our fire flow storage again.
Back to your question, I'm trying to keep up with some of the acronyms on that. My follow-up question to you is whose responsibility is it to find out those numbers that you were just asking, if we're collecting enough to cover the base rate versus I'm trying to keep up with that.
That's a discussion that really is initiated by council in the budget session, in the budget season, to understand as utility rates are discussed. This is the first time I've heard of this discussion where what is the base covering? Are we making sure that what the base is covering is what the base should cover
Right.
versus what rate should cover? I think it's part of that growth of the city as we mature. So I would say staff.
So yeah, who's responsible to find those numbers? 'Cause I think those numbers would be
Well, I
very
think-
valuable.
John and Public Works Director, work to get those numbers to us. Maybe not to us at this point, but at least to council. I would think before council makes a final decision on utility fee rates, right? Because if we find things that, like the PRVs, because you're doing more this year, if those PRVs ought to be coming out of the usage rate versus the base rate, does the usage rate then need to be adjusted to cover those PRVs?
Right.
And maybe the base rate doesn't need to be, don't know what the math turns out to be. But I think we should look at that, council should look at that before a final budget within, well, depending, whenever the final budget is passed, that discussion ought to be had. And council weigh in on whether or not those, the funds, those two, they're all together, but base rate versus usage fees are going where they should go. So
I think having that information helps justify the increase as well. If there's gonna be an increase, rather
Sure
than
it
just, I always need more money, but let's explain to the council and explain to the citizens, this is why.
Sure.
So, like I said, who's responsible to track those down?
And usually it's the finance director, and Jamie has been helping us get this information together. We were, part of it, like I said, ties to that discussion of salaries, because that can impact rates. And then typically in June, as we're talking about adopting the final budget, we have here's the fee schedule amendment discussion with the council. So
Is it possible for the work session that you have in 2 weeks to include some of this discussion?
that's the goal, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you'll have numbers and we can attend that work session in 2 weeks and
Yeah.
and here's some numbers.
You know, most people, if you just look at Provo, they're just now going to use, they've just had a flat rate across their entire city.
Big news too.
The reason people go to the stepped up rate is for conservation. You know, it depends on how detailed you want to get. We could hire 10 accountants to do this. And I think it comes down to the pay for play philosophy. But I mean, you could go through this because my argument would be is I'm not paying for that new water tank down there.
Sure.
I'm not using it. But the people down that part of the city pay for it, which would just explode their water bill. they've got a $3 million, they've got a, what, $100,000 a year increase in depreciation.
Yeah.
So to me, you gotta decide how technically you wanna get on all this stuff. Because you could. I mean, question is, what difference does it make? Because right now it's structured where the water department is an enterprise fund and it's self-funded, right? In fact, Dave would tell you, my position was on this when base fee was increased, it covered everybody, but most people in the city, right, I found out that about 50% only use 3,000 gallons or less. So we said, that's the base fee, and we just increased it dramatically for those that are using over 3,000. But I mean, if you start on this type, you gotta do it throughout the entire city on everything. And what's the value of it? I think that's the question somebody has to ask.
What is the value?
Because, I don't have any trees in my yard, so I don't wanna pay for the leaf truck.
I'll send you some of
All the
mine.
people in the main part of the city have the big trees. There's where all the leaves are falling. I mean, you can take this thing, and I'm just wondering how far you wanna take it.
I think that's a question that council and staff has to answer. I mean, ours is just
You
a,
need to make a recommendation. I think that's your job, right?
yeah,
Your
Well,
job to make the decision.
I thought we said we weren't gonna decide on philosophy versus, well, I guess if it's paid, you know what I'm saying? Paid to use. I mean, we
well,
talked
I
about
think
that
what,
already.
what I hear Mayor saying, and Mayor, correct me if I'm interpreting it incorrectly, is there's no end to the minutia that we can get into with what covers what. And who's paying for what, and is there something on my utility bill that I'm paying for that I don't get to use?
Well, and what you start doing is segmenting the city, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you got this segment that pays this and that, and does it bring the community together? I'll tell you, in the grocery business, you look at your bottom line because there's certain things you don't make any money on. And there's certain things you make a lot of money on, right?
Right.
But the thing is you look to say, okay, what am I trying to accomplish at the bottom line? Now you want to look at your cost and see if there's a more efficient way to do it. But you could take this thing down a pretty long trail. And then what's the ultimate value of doing that? I think is the question in my mind. Either way, I'm just saying, what's the value of the proposition?
So maybe the recommendation is, from the committee that staff look at that and determine whether or not that amount of detail is necessary. Is there, as Mayor's pointed out, is there a value gain by having that additional detail? I mean, there's no end to the amount of detail that we can ask you to churn out. Is there a value to that? Will it really make a difference? I think that's the main question is,
Yes, it does, fine.
ultimately, with this utility fund, this enterprise fund, will it make a difference? Either in the revenue, substantially, or in the accounting for that revenue, does it really make a difference? So we'll make that recommendation to council, that council and staff make that decision. That's what they're elected to do. And, you guys determine to what degree of minutia you want to dig into and whether or not there's a value to it.
Well, and we kind of have a easy breakdown of the rates. This is what pays for this and this is what pays for that. And we'll bring that to the work session, so that the council and everyone can see it, and that will precede the final fee schedule discussion that'll happen late in June, right? And so it'll give us some time to work through some of those details, just so that we can outline the philosophy that staff is using and recommending to the council on. We think that the base rate should cover these items. And a good example is, like I mentioned, salaries, right? So employee salaries, if it's in the base rate, then as more people get added and we eventually get close to the need for adding an additional person to help maintain PRVs and fire hydrants and things like that, it's already in the base rate that the new houses have paid for, and the money's already there for the new person. And prior to that, we might be using it on that one-time money, but as soon as we then transfer it to a salary, then the money in theory has been there all the time. We've just been using it for other things while it was, let's say it's per 1,000 homes. So we have 7,200 accounts. So there's 200 homes that would be paying that salary for a person that's not there. But as soon as we might get to 7,700 homes, we need that person. So that money is now moved forward to cover that until we hit the 8,000 homes. That might have been a terrible analogy, but that's what I got.
My pipes are new up there too, John, so I don't wanna pay for it. Like that, 'cause my pipes are all new, or I
Yeah.
So, you know, all the main part of the city where it's old pipes, I prefer for them to pay it. That's the dilemma you get into, I do think
No, I-
analogy there. But, you know, you've heard me say, are we a community or a city? And there's always gonna be some level of subsidy, right? I mean, that's probably the difference between business and government is, you know, there's a degree of subsidy, and we always used to have this discussion associated, right? The little guys always thought the big guys were getting the better deals but you know, it was a co-op, so everybody kind of participated. But
Good.
whatever you guys decide to recommend the council says, we'll comply with.
Committee okay with that recommendation then? I know from just from my personal perspective, it's having gone through the last almost 12 years with the city budget and looking at the amount of detail we had 12 years ago versus the amount of detail that we have now. We have so much more detail and it's so much better and so much easier to follow what's going on. I think sometimes we can get caught in this cycle of more is better, more is better, more is better. And Mayor, thank you for pointing out that sometimes we reach that point of diminishing returns where
Right.
more doesn't really give us anything. And I think that's what Mayor's hinting at here. So staff, do your thing.
Okay. Okay. Oh, we're doing transportation utilities fees for next.
Yes.
So not this that's on the screen. So
Ignore.
ignore it, please.
Not like-
So on transportation utility fees, in 2 weeks, there will be a work session where we'll talk to the council about it. But currently, the plan is to create a study which identifies the two types of residential uses we have, which is typically connected units, non-connected units, and using the Institute of Traffic Engineers on the number of traffics that each of those units generate, figure out a monthly fee to help to fix our roads. As we mentioned, I think a couple of weeks ago, that roads are, if we were to bring every road in the city to brand new status, it would cost $110 million. There's 55 miles of roads. So, you know, we call them lane miles or miles. Lane miles is, you know, both is each direction counts as a direction or as a mile, but we typically just say 55 miles of road, and that's what you think curb to curb. The reality is not all of our roads need to be completely redone because they're in the 10 to 20 life left. But probably 70% of our roads are less than 10 years of life left and need something on them. And those somethings are more expensive than the type of treatments you would do on a 10-year-old road. And so we'll have better numbers, but ballpark 90 million of the 110 million is for the 10-year and less life on the road left over. So we need to come up with a plan we're not going to fix it. We're not going to spend $90 million on roads in the next 10 years to get everything into shape, but we need to start chipping away at it and doing what we can.
So real quick on the font, so you're talking $90 million, 10 years, so easy numbers, 100 million, 10 years, $10 million a year is what we need to get to. How much do we have in that account right now?
So, in the capital improvement fund account, there is currently $2 million.
Okay, so we're for 1 year, we're 80% off. Okay, so we got 7,200 homes.
But that's the balance. That's not the amount. We typically right now for a year, we get $900,000 of road money.
Okay. So we need another $9 million in theory per year. So The nine,
Sorry, I'm just joking there.
It's about $60 a month for everything.
60 bucks, okay, cause the last time you think you said it was 40 bucks a month. Are we aiming at that 40 or 60 bucks a month, or is that what we're still trying to figure out?
Staff recommendation is going to be around $10 a month. Because
Okay.
to ask more is probably not feasible,
Okay.
just because and then with that philosophy to creep it up every year. And just see what we can do. We also, with that $10 plus the B&C road funds, we'll be able to start doing about twice as much work as we have been. The recommendation is to spend 50% of the money on those roads that are between 6 years and 10 years, because those are the roads that if we save before they get to a 5-year useful life left, then we can get them back to 15 fairly easy. As soon as they hit that 4 to 5 year life, it's a mill and fill or a complete rebuild down to sub base. We have some roads that need to be taken down this far to sub base. So there's 6 inches of asphalt and 12 inches of road base. And we need to go all the way down and rebuild. And that's very expensive per mile. When we come back next week, or in 2 weeks with the council, we'll provide this is how far we can get on each of those. But what we'll spend the majority of the money on is the chip seal, which is what you typically think of. You know, they come and they spray it with oil, then they put a chip across it, and then they spray it with oil again.
Are you seeing more damage to roads up on the hill because the roads are sliding? Or is the road person seeing that? I mean, are we spending more money? Spending more money to plow up on the hill? Are we spending more money to maintain the roads up on the hill as well? Is that being factored in? Is a tiered system something that needs to be discussed?
There will be a tiered system. And so I'm glad you said that, because I didn't finish my thought earlier. So there'll be houses and connected units will pay a different fee. Businesses will pay a different fee. Schools and churches will pay a different fee. And then we're talking about with businesses breaking those apart into 3 different groups: the high use businesses, and then small businesses and large businesses, just so that we can somehow use something reasonable to calculate it. And using that Institute of Traffic Engineers numbers manual, to put it simply, if we charge a house $10 a month, the average daily trips for a house is 10. It's really 9, but let's just for numbers say it's 10. Well, if a business generates 50 trips a day, then they would pay $50 a month. And so that'll be added to the utility bill. And to your point, you know, we do have some roads on the hill that are worse than others. It's typically the construction traffic road.
But are we noticing, I mean, North Ogden's been on a hill for a long time. Are we noticing more maintenance as it goes up the hill, or
It's mostly on construction.
is the construction stuff doing the
It's-
damage? Okay.
We see it, and then that area goes away because all that construction got done around that area, and then you'll start seeing it creep up the hill, but it's more based on construction than it is on actual use.
And one thing that we're very healthy or very lucky to have, and this is compared to like Plain City, our soil is pretty good. In fact, like you've probably seen, the council has done some on-site sorting, so people can bring in a big gravel sorting machine, and they create their own road base, because our material is so granular that it holds roads really good. So that sub base that we don't touch is pretty good sub base.
I'm gonna disagree with you on the soil, because I had to get my soil from Plain City.
Well, your topsoil, yeah.
He's talking.
Yeah, to get anything to grow. But then when you we have some issues, like springs are an issue that we deal with the hillside that will undermine our roads, and we have to try and track them down and move them into the storm drain system. We had that happen over on 100 East and 3900 North 2 years ago. If you tried to go through that intersection, it just imploded because of water surfacing. So the reality is, the other thing that the city and staff is quite aware of, Dave and I went to some training, but their transportation utility fees are still a controversial topic in the state. There is a group that is looking for a city to sue, and so we're being cautious on how we approach this, because we don't want to be the one that it's called Libertas. We don't want to be the group or the city that Libertas sues, because now you're talking about spending $150,000, $200,000 in legal fees to fight for your, I was going to say fight for your right to party, but to fight for your transportation utility fee.
But that was part of your salary is to be the lawyer.
How many cities are doing a fee?
So currently in the state, there are 9. Dave, in your impression, how many people in that room raised their hands that they were considering a utility fee?
About 30. 30 more.
Yeah. And some of your cities that have done it and have done it, been very successful. Provo has one. Salt Lake is talking about doing one. Pleasant Grove is the one who got sued last. But that's where the guy who owns Libertas lives, and so that's why they were on the radar. But there's so there, we wish that with the discussion we would have with the council in 2 weeks at the work session, that we could just pick a fee and move forward. But likely we'll solidify the philosophy with the council, and then we're going to go out and probably hire a group for $10,000 to $15,000 to write the study for us, to do the last part of the work so that it's bulletproof. And if we get sued, that we can survive the judicial scrutiny on it. And the courts have weighed in and said, yes, it's a legitimate fee if it's calculated correctly. And that's what they're going to be attacking is, was it calculated correctly?
John,
Yes.
since the legislature is trying to wrangle over this excluding churches and schools, that's the big debate. Why wouldn't we just increase property taxes to cover it? Still comes out of the pocket. You don't pay a $15,000 fee. And if they're gonna exclude churches and schools anyway. Could you do that?
Yeah.
See, technically, we've got money sitting in our general fund balance that should be used for roads. Because when this whole thing started, we moved it from, as they were saying, it's still a tax. So we moved it over to property tax, increased property tax $3 a year for that, you'll recall. But why wouldn't we consider doing that?
I would love that.
Out of the pocket, and we're gonna hold truth and taxation hearings anyway. I mean, it's out of the citizen's pocket one way or the other.
It's so from a legal perspective, that is extremely safe. From a political perspective, for the council's sake, that's a very dangerous thing to do, because to generate $1 million more in property tax, you're going to have to ask for a 40% increase. And 40% increase in property tax sounds worse than $10 a month, although it's the same dollar amount, to the mayor's point.
Well,
Yeah.
does it also though make it easier for future councils to say,
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a fee, a transportation fee, that kind of puts it in a more of a restricted fund, although not technically, but it's at least identified as something versus just a property tax.
Yep.
You can identify that as a restricted fund balance.
As that portion.
Yeah.
I just did a couple of quick calculations. I took my home and what we paid to North Ogden City last year, and $10 a month equates to a 24% property tax increase. I took another home down on 1700. My home paid $502 to North Ogden last year. This home down on 1700 paid $255 for them. It's a 47% increase. In the equivalent of a 47% increase in property taxes for the transportation utility fee, if it's a $10 fee across the board.
So Bill, isn't it still a 47% increase with, I mean, it's just what you call it.
Yeah.
And, you've heard me say this, that's what I hate about politics, right? People are afraid to do the right thing because they're afraid they're not gonna get reelected. Well, it's gonna save the city money, it's the safest thing to do. I mean, to me, the only reason you wouldn't do that is strictly a political reason.
So the recommendation to council would be to have that discussion on, do you do it as a transportation utility fee at $10 a month? Or do you calculate, I mean, because you wouldn't do it by home, and every home wouldn't be paying 120. If you do it by value on a property tax basis, it kind of fits in with your tiered thinking that those with bigger, more expensive homes would pay more, those with smaller, less expensive homes
would pay less because it would be an increase in the tax rate.
My tiered thought though was for use and for damage. If the road's sliding down the hill because you
Yep.
live on the hill, you pay more.
Yep.
I think you call it a fee. That's gonna be my recommendation because everybody uses the roads. Everybody uses water. It's a water fee, it's a road fee. Call it a fee.
Okay.
And if we put that out there, that the average home uses 10 trips a day, the average business uses 50 trips a day. You're paying $10 a month to use the road in front of your house 10 times a day. That to me
I
is
tend to
reasonable.
agree because it's very specific.
Mhm.
And when you say restrictive, I think restrictive is good, because sometimes you increase property taxes and it just kind of goes into this pot,
Cloud
and then
of-
everything and
and use it
everybody
for
starts
whatever.
grabbing.
You can fix that, and I'll just tell you, I'm gonna stand up and say, you're incurring 15 grand you don't need to incur, and you're incurring legal risk.
By calling it
That
a
will be
fee,
my statement.
by calling it a fee,
No, yeah, by calling it a fee,
Yeah, instead
have
of
to
just
go get a
raising a
study.
property tax rate.
pay $15,000, then you're gonna expose yourself to a legal battle.
And that goes away if it's a,
if you raise
If it's
taxes.
a property tax increase, then
there's no risk of being.
Libertas or anybody else couldn't come in and say that you're creating an illegal tax or anything like that.
Their original lawsuit was you're trying to avoid truth and taxation,
Okay,
and that's what they lost.
okay,
So
so we know.
So instead of doing that, you do 40% and just call it good, and then supposedly it goes up every year, right?
I mean,
Right? I mean,
it could.
No,
Yeah.
but your point was that $10 is gonna go up every year, therefore you've already not just a property tax that goes up, incrementally like we've been talking about, but no, it's a significant chunk every year. So it's not like 4 or 5, it's 10 to 20 every year.
And this
Right.
is some of the things that will come into this conversation that the council started last night, and we won't wrap up in 2 weeks, but we'll talk about is this philosophy. If this is the direction, that the council ultimately decides to go, then they need to come up with some sort of an ongoing philosophy that, hey, there's a portion of property tax we need to increase every year because we need to be catching up on roads. Right? And so I think that's kind of the point you're trying to make, is that we can do it, but if we do it for 1 year, it's not enough. That's what you're trying to say, right, Chris?
Well, if you put it in the fee, you're not gonna do it just once. You're gonna have, $10 isn't gonna get you it's gonna get you somewhere, but you're gonna have to increase the fee every year.
Right, but it's the optics of every month you're paying an extra $10 to pay for the roads. On the 15 grand, can we avoid that $15,000 study? I mean, how necessary is that?
It just would provide us a little extra cover for a lawsuit.
A little
And how
extra
much would a
cover.
lawsuit be as opposed to?
But-
15?
Yeah, but the lawsuit, it's gonna provide a little extra cover. I mean, going back to your point, if it's 15 grand, I don't see the 15 grand as being that big of a deal, but you feel like it is?
Well, I'm saying that you're talking substance over form. The substance is, you're taking it out of the pocket of the citizen.
It's coming out of the pocket of citizens regardless, whether it's taxes or whether it's a fee.
That's what he said.
That's what I'm saying. That's the substance of the thing.
So why do a
The form is-
$15,000 study and risk a lawsuit if there's another way to take the money out of the pockets? That
Politically,
doesn't,
John's right politically, but that's the problem with politics. It gets in the way of doing the right thing.
so the recommendation from this committee then? Look at the transportation utility fee versus a
Mhm.
property tax
Mhm.
increase. With the our understanding, and obviously I'll mention that not everybody on the committee feels that a property tax is, I mean, does the committee feel strongly one way or the other, or strongly just about have that conversation? Council makes that decision.
I feel strongly called a fee.
I'm okay with property tax.
Okay,
Me too.
and I'm okay with the property tax, so,
The only question I have on the property tax, multifamily units that have got dozens and dozens and dozens of.
that doesn't ever play into it.
Does that?
It's just home
No,
value.
you just,
Yeah.
Just value. So if it's a fee, it's based on trips. If it's taxes, it's based on value of the structure.
Yeah, so somebody who has, let's say you've got somebody,
20-plex.
what's that?
A 20-plex is gonna put a whole lot more use on the roads right there than.
Yeah, or, somebody like you mentioned, you have somebody in a 2,500 square foot house that has 4 vehicles, 5 vehicles. That has, like the one that I pulled up there on 1,700.
they've got a whole lot more wear and tear on the road because they've got 4 or 5 vehicles that are going versus the couple that lives high up on the hill that's in tens of thousands of square foot house worth millions of dollars, and they don't really ever go anywhere. They're putting hardly anything on the roads, wear and tear wise, but they're paying much more just because of the value of their home. I think that's an important discussion to have. I understand fully what you're saying, Mayor, though, that you're pulling money out of pockets either way.
And, you know, who knows who's using the roads, right?
Yeah.
I've got one more thought on that property tax. So if we're gonna do, if the council decides to go the tax increase into the truth and taxation, a year ago, North Ogden City raises 10%. And I was told, and you wanted to hire somebody, and then Severing told me that it was for filling potholes, and I came back and said, how many potholes have been filled? Last night, you were talking about another 4% increase to hire somebody else. My point is, if we're gonna raise taxes, and that's gonna be the recommendation, then it needs to be very clear that that money is going to roads.
Right.
And last year, it was not very clear, and I feel like I was lied to by either you or Severing, saying, Severing said potholes, you said hire somebody. So again, that's where I go back to call it a fee. It's a road fee. It's dedicated to the roads. It sucks for everybody, but that's what it is. So
Yeah.
that's my thoughts. If you're gonna go the raise taxes route, you gotta be
Well,
clear that it's for roads.
And to your point, that there isn't an ordinance or resolution on the books that says everything that comes into the city and property tax goes to public safety. So we'll need to change that document. And because in the past, what we've done is we've increased our property tax to reduce the public safety burden on sales tax. And then we use those sales tax dollars to go out and spend on other stuff. And so it's this nuance that, as you've explained, the council and the staff have not been communicating it the same way, because the way people understand property tax is the city takes my property tax and they spend it on roads and parks and public safety. And the reality is North Ogden spends it all on public safety, but that frees up sales tax dollars to be spent someplace else. And so when we have those conversations, that nexus isn't ever connected, which is saying we're freeing up sales tax dollars to move over here. But your point's right on that if we're going to do this, the council probably needs to change their resolution to say this much goes to public safety and this much goes to roads. And it'd probably be a percentage.
Don't call it public safety, call it roads. That's what we want to hear. If that's what it's gonna go to, call it roads, because public safety, for me, immediately thinks of the police department.
Well, right now, all property tax goes to the police department, every penny. And so what John is saying is with the current resolution that's on the books, that dedicates all property tax to the police department, raising the property tax increases the pot that goes to the police department, which would free up additional sales tax revenue to be used on the road. What John is saying is he'd recommend to council that council undo that resolution on the property tax, that it's all dedicated to public safety police. And go back to the way it used to be, that a portion is dedicated to public safety, a portion is dedicated to general fund things like roads.
Well,
and
John,
things
isn't
like
that
that.
the argument is because if you say it's a use fee, you have to be able to identify use.
Yep.
And they're saying the older person or somebody that rides their bike, you're making them pay for something they're not using. Whereas a tax is, that's the whole argument that you get down to, is how do you identify who's using the roads and how they use? Isn't that the whole argument?
Yeah.
And
But
that's why
we're-
they're saying it's closer to a tax.
We're already doing that all over the city with the pool, with so many other things. I have never been to the pool. Part of my money goes there, right?
That's why it's a tax instead of a fee. That's why we use taxes,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Parks, same thing.
So our recommendation to the council then will be to have that discussion with the clarifications that if they choose to do it as a property tax, that it's somehow clearly delineated and marked and
And you
from an
better
accounting
explain it during the
standpoint.
Truth and
Exactly,
taxation,
right.
Chris, over.
So,
I mean,
Make sure you're you'll be asked. Every
Well,
one of you
if
will be
we go
asked.
that route, yes.
And
so that'll be the
Yes.
recommendation that we
That's why I
make,
say
is to
call it
have the
fee.
discussion. And if you're gonna do it as a tax instead of a clear fee, that there needs to be these delineations and dedications and all that kind of good stuff.
Because, yeah,
So
there's
the-
a lot of, sorry.
No, so that the public knows exactly my property tax is going up because we need another $1 million a year in roads. It's not going up because we have to fund more of the pool or because of playground equipment somewhere else needs to get replaced.
And I think it also should be clarified and say we need $10 million a year in roads. And we're asking for $1 million, so we're still getting behind.
Yeah.
Again, make it clear,
Yeah.
but don't tell me at truth in taxation that you want to hire somebody and then have Severing tell me he's gonna fill potholes, and I come back and say, how many potholes did he fill? And you guys all look at me like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
That's reasonable.
No, I think messaging is critical. And on this one especially, I think a written document that stays on the website that says this is where your property tax dollars go. So it's easy for people to see, find, understand. And hopefully this group would provide some feedback saying, hey, Dave, that document's not clear enough, right? We need to fix it.
They'll send that out to us before you.
Yeah, assuming we had done that path, then I think that having feedback from council and this group on how we make that very clear, we'll put it on Facebook, assuming everything passes, and just help get the word out.
Mike, before you go on, Councilmember Pulver had something to say.
I just, the fact of the matter is, and I think, it was kind of evident last night, is the fact that, budgeting and counting are almost two different worlds. And I think that's the problem in some of the respect for the council. I'll be one of them to raise my hand, that I think sometimes when you're talking about delineation of things that doesn't matter. I think accounting rules, dictate certain things and it won't show up as the way you think it's gonna show up. The whole depreciation thing, I'm still arguing, but there's certain things that you think.
Did you guys not talk?
No, we talked, but
Okay,
still,
free feed still with session.
we'll get there. The fact that, some things aren't gonna connect, and I think if we've been doing this, everybody in this room has been here long enough to understand the intricacies, and if you go to, pick my wife, because she's very, isolated sometimes in the way she thinks, and if I brought that to her without any kind of, context, I'd be sleeping somewhere else. Because the bottom line, and that's gonna be for most citizens, they're gonna, why did you tell me one thing and it's a different way? Because I just looked at the budget and it's not going anywhere where I thought. So there's a whole bunch of, optics, I don't know if someone used that word, I think is we're probably behind in that respect if we wanted to do something tax wise. And that's why I don't know if it's even a possibility, but we'll talk about it. I think,
That's a council discussion.
yeah.
And that, Mayor, as you mentioned, that's where the politics comes in.
Well, and I can tell you, council decided it's a fee. If I was a betting person, they decided it's a fee. Cause it's easier politically to say that. Once again, the only counting thing is substance over form. But either way, we need the money, so whatever the council decides, we'll get the money.
We'll let them make that decision.
But, you'll never catch up to $10 a month because inflation will.
Yeah.
Well, when was your study done? Your paving study?
So it just was completed in October, August.
Yeah.
So we,
As part of that, did it illustrate the cost of waiting? So it said you need to do $10 million a year. If you don't, that 10 million becomes 25 million at some point.
so the financial side hasn't been done. It was just the remaining useful life study is what we did. And so we know how many miles of road are in the 7-year range. And so with the finance person, that was part of the discussion, is how do we show that if we don't fix that 7-year road and it becomes a 6-year road, what changes in the cost? And some of them, they won't change, like a 9 to an 8. It's gonna be the same treatment, which
No,
is a
but
chip seal.
your older road systems, it will drastically change.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if you go to a full depth repair versus a mill and overlay.
Yeah.
Your cost isn't just double, it's,
At
yeah.
least.
yeah. And yeah, so that part hasn't been done yet, which is part of the reason that we think we can run the numbers, especially with the mayor's accounting expertise. But we can show the basics. The trouble is that it probably won't be shown in a form that is generally accepted in the industry in a way that not that Dave and I are incapable, but if it looks like it was done with a crayon, we're gonna be right at the top of the list of cities to sue, whether it was done right or not. So having an outside consulting firm who has stamped it makes it that much more official and less likely to be sued, even though the data and the analysis is likely gonna be the same.
And it's not an engineering firm.
No.
That's why
No.
it only
Oh,
cost
it's not.
That's why it only cost you 15 to 20. If you used an engineering firm, it's probably 75.
That's where I thought 15 was low.
That was Frank.
The pavement study was
I'll do
40
it for
grand.
free.
Yeah, the pavement study was just 40 grand and then.
So, and that was done by a group that specializes in public works information called iWork. We use them for their electronic system, but they provide this service as well. And it's essentially, they have engineers that come out and they video every road and then say from this corner to this corner is an 8-year road, this corner to this corner is a 12-year road. And they gave the whole city, every road that's in our system.
Mayor, I got one more question for you. Do you have the guts to tell the city what you just said to us, that $10 is never gonna get us caught up? I mean, if we start at $10 and then 2026 is going to 15, I mean, it's not
Yeah,
politically
I think-
popular, but I think you're
you've got-
spot
I
on.
think you've got to be transparent.
I agree.
And frankly, Phil understands this. I mean, it's easy to pass it on to the next guy, right? And so, to me, you gotta deal with reality. What you do with reality is a different story.
Here's
Yeah,
another,
I think we've gotta tell our residents that our
Population.
roads suck,
So-
and this is the cost to repair it.
here's a thought. If you don't wanna put your name on it as a mayor, put my name on it as a citizen finance guy. I've been doing this research. I would be open to that idea, is all I'm saying. Get the information out there. Say, look, guys, we're behind on our roads, but we're shutting down the pool.
The good thing about it is I'm not running.
No, but
I think the citizens, somehow they need to know why we do things and what the condition of the city is.
yeah,
So however you wanna do it, but I think transparently, they need to know. And here's the problem, you're in an economic potentially downturn, right? And you're saying, hey, we're gonna charge you $5 a month more for utilities. We're gonna charge you $10 a month more for a transportation utility fee. And we're gonna charge you $15 a year or $2 a month more in property tax. And it's not gonna go over well, but you know, it's the reality. And what we decide to do with reality is up to the council, but I think our citizens need to know what reality is. And, you know, we tried recently to take our biggest expense and try to figure a way to be more efficient. It didn't work. But we can both take the blame if we want.
it's fine.
But, yeah, I guess my answer would be, yeah, it's, you know, it's not the council's fault.
Right, but nobody wants to do it. It's like I said, let's put
Yeah,
some,
but to me, it gives credibility to the council if they're willing to deal with the hard things and be transparent. I mean, you can't, they didn't destroy the roads, I mean, they didn't. But whatever you want, I'm more.
So I added to the recommendation, Brian, for the rest of the group, that part of the discussion with council needs to be a transparency about where we are. Right? I mean, the honest truth that we're $110 million in the hole. And that will grow exponentially if we don't take care of some of the problems soon. Because we go from a basic, you know, like a fog coat or whatever, to having to do a mill and overlay or maybe a full depth replacement. And be transparent about what it's gonna cost, what the pain is to catch up, to get us on the road to catching up. Obviously, we're not gonna catch up in 1 year. Or even in probably 5 or 10 years, but to be very honest about and willing to say, and I'm willing to, you know, give me the numbers, I'll do it as the one giving the recommendations from this committee. That this is where we are, this is what it's gonna cost, and council, you have to wrestle with whether or not you're gonna make that decision, how you're going to make that decision, how you're going to do it, what are you gonna call it? How much will it be? That all lies on the council.
That's why they get the big bucks.
Why they get the big.
Yeah, speaking of money. We ready to move on to that?
Are we good here? Andy? Brian?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, so I am not broadcasting this website onto Zoom. And the reason why is I'm not sure that we are allowed to under our agreement with them, but I feel that we're safe to share it with the group, although people could probably see it from there. And if someone has questions, that we can provide people with the information that's contained in it, you know, if someone really wanted it. But this is the comp survey system, or we call it TechNet, because that's the company that owns it. But under there, this is the system we use to compare what we're paying our employees against what other cities are paying their employees. And we do that in two different ways. The first is we pull these reports, and the report allows us to look on any of our categories of employees. So all employees, aquatics, emergency engineering, and for today, we'll just run an all employees report. And then we compare against cities within 75 miles for one, just to help us understand the market, and more specifically, cities of our size, which is 10 to 25,000. Now we're getting closer and closer to the 25,000. There are some other ones that the system will give us, like 10 to 25 within 75 miles of us. That ends up limiting the number of positions in some so much that it's useless data to us. So we really relied heavily on this 10 to 25,000. And then we just look at what the hourly rate is. We run our report and it spits it out. And so it will tell us so we currently don't have an entry level accountant, but it's one of those positions we've followed because we've talked about maybe a need for it in the city in the future. And so we look and we say, okay, in Centerville, Harriman, American Fork, and North Logan, they actually, or I guess North Logan does have a hired employee, but these folks don't have anyone. But in the past they have, so they have some numbers. But what we start looking at is what is the average pay for that position in those cities of our size. So North Logan, Vineyard, Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs, and Syracuse is who we would compare against. And the system just spits out this number. So this is the number we would use to compare against our employee's salary. And we would make sure our employees the current policy is at least 90% of that number and no higher than 110% of that number.
John, quick question.
Yeah.
Go down there to that staff accountant for Syracuse right there.
Mm-hmm.
The one that you highlighted. If you go over to the actuals, you've got a minimum of 2832, max of 4075. How can the average be 4075?
Because this is inputted by people. And so
Isn't the average closer to the median, which is
Yeah,
2659?
yes, it is. And so that's the last part of the survey that we do. Is when we take this analysis and these numbers and we put them in our tracking system. So we have a spreadsheet that every time we pull the report, we put in the new number, the new average. And if we see a spike, like a 30% jump, then we come back to this sheet and say why. Because this, to me, to your point, Phil, looks like someone has said that the way it's written, what they've done is they've actually just taken their range and duplicated it over here.
Staff accountants over there.
Right, because every one of them, the average matches the max
Yeah.
for each city.
Yeah. And so this is one of those that, this one in particular, I haven't looked a lot at. So is there another job you want to look at that we can jump down? Because this has it doesn't have it does actually have a number. So let me find one. We don't have a building inspector 3, but we have a building inspector 1. And so it does show the North Ogden City number here. And we also show up here in the North Ogden.
Where are we? There we are.
And so this is what we actually pay the individuals. And so if there's a position you want to look at that provides a better analysis, we can do that. But that is the major flaw with this system, is it does include some user error. And so whenever there's something that feels super like a weird anomaly, we dig into it. And we say, why to that accounting one, why is that position at 4075, which is the top of their range? And there are some times that we will take a number completely out of the system and say, this isn't correct. Clearly not right. I think a city recorder at one time, there was a position where they had them listed making $1.2 million a year because they moved their decimal point, right? So that obviously threw off the average. And so we've peeled that out. But you know, what we do find, and this chief building official is a good example, where you start getting a lot of data points that start telling you, you know, the high that Heber City pays 63.51 and the low that Vernal pays at 39.78 give us the average of 50, and then our goal is 90 to 110% of that number. It's not a perfect system, but it helps.
$50 an hour is roughly 100 grand plus benefits.
There are a few jobs where we don't look at the 10 to 25,000 miles or dollars people. We look at 75 mile an hour for our frontline police officers. So that's a police officer 1, 2, and 3, and then our detectives. And as soon as we get into leadership, we go back to small city, because the thought is that a sergeant in a small city deals with the same type of problems that a sergeant in a small city deals with. But we are competing with the cities within 75 miles of us for our frontline officers. And so we've done that as a retention thing, and that typically has resulted in a higher rate, because now Salt Lake and West Valley and some of those other cities fall into there. And so they skew the number up, but you still have the North Ogdens, the Logans, and those others that help skew it down a little bit. So the range doesn't just grow exponentially like $20, even though Salt Lake might pay $20 more an hour, but the range typically moves up a few dollars to account for that. And that's helped us to keep and attract new officers by moving that. But the majority of employees are dealing with cities of our size. All of the department heads are cities of our size, just as a philosophical approach that we deal with problems that cities of our size deal with. So,
Tom, can you scroll down on that city recorder and just go down to the summary? Right there.
so this is a
No, just right there, where the stats, that light blue. I'm just looking at the numbers there.
Yeah, I think, John, that's the average of the maximum. They've just taken all the maximums by city and computed.
Yeah, that doesn't,
I don't think that's the median. That's the average of the maximum.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So if we use
Well,
that in our study,
So Eagle Mountain over here says their range goes up to $78,
right,
and they're currently paying that position $66.
right. Yeah, I was looking at, go scroll, there we
most
go,
of them
right
are
there.
at the
So
maximum.
the range, 32 to 40 to 47. Actual, 39 to 41.
And that's the average of the actuals.
Right. The average, so those are averages of the actuals above. And so that 4092 seems to be the average between 3967 and 4132. I think that's pretty close, and the median 3944.
So yeah,
I just was looking at the numbers in every section above, where it shows the average off to the right. Go up. Right there, off to the right. Seems like every one of those numbers, regardless of the position that we're looking at, that average number matches whatever the max is.
so, which is true for a city recorder, because every city has one.
Right.
So what they're actually paying the person is going to be the average and going to be the max. So let's jump down to officer, because that'll be a good, probably should have just police officer, it's here somewhere. Police chief, so police officer 1.
Okay.
So their minimum actual is 2503, their max is 2603, and their median is this.
Okay.
which the median ends up being their average.
Right.
But when you get to some of the bigger cities, like a Farmington, you know, their lowest officer that's a PO1 is 3114 and their highest is 3503. And so as soon as you get into those positions where there's more than one person in a city, you're working two averages, the internal city average and then all the city averages, which gives you the 3060 as the average for a PO1. In those single positions, the average min max is always going to be the same because every city only has one city recorder. And one thing I should have highlighted is in that city recorder position, there's a couple different job descriptions that say city recorder. So there's a 130, a 140, and a 142. Those are just job codes. And ours is a 140 because the 130 has typically some responsibility for the front desk and some other things where we have Bryce who manages the front desk. And so it's a different range, a different category. And we rely really heavily on the job description that's tied to it. And we haven't talked about that, but that each of these job numbers has a specific job description that describes what that person does.
So when I'm looking, I think what I'm missing, what I just realized is I was looking at the, stop right there. Where did it go? Can you scroll down just a little bit more? The third, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth column. So you got the hours, the N, and then that next column right there. Go to the left, no, keep going, go, keep going. Two more. That 8. Is that the number of officers that they have?
Correct.
So somewhere in there is a calculation that is, when they're getting their average, they're including the number of officers that they have at each pay thing. Because otherwise the math doesn't add up.
Yeah, so what happens, and Katie is the one who inputs this for the city, is she would hard code the 8 for this is how many officers are in this position.
Right.
She would do the min and the max, but she would not say put in the salary for each one that gives the average in this system. But I think Katie does. So for our city, our actual average, when we inputted this number on 7/11 of 24, this was the average of our 10 officers.
Okay.
Some cities, because this is typed in, they don't necessarily do it that way.
Okay.
So there's some wiggling in the numbers.
Okay.
And that's just the reality. But that is part of the reason we don't use the range. We used to use the range, and the city used to say, well, if their minimum is 27 and their max is 37, then that's going to be ours. And what we found by doing that is the majority of the cities were either paying everyone at the minimum or everyone at the maximum. And the range didn't matter. So we started focusing on what are they actually paying their people. And you can see in this position, 10% more than the 3060 would be $30.90, give or take. Whereas the max that we would have used 10, 15 years ago would have said $37 was our max for that range. And so we've tightened ours up a little bit by focusing on what are people actually getting paid. Understanding that Saratoga Springs with their 30 officers, they have some brand new officers and they have some officers with 10 years of experience in that position. And so the average of that, we think probably meshes with our average because we don't have everyone brand new or everyone 10 years. We kind of have a good mix. So it is not a perfect system. And like I said, we find some anomalies. And so we have several documents that are created based on these reports. One shows how is that position, this job number, been moving every 6 months. Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Is it sometimes it'll go down, it'll go into a negative, because a city like Brigham City might lose their police chief and then hire a new police chief and pay him less. And so the average shifts for the whole market. And so we look for those changes, and anything that's over like that 5% range, we dig into to see why did it change a lot. And we've had some positions that moved 25% in 6 months, and we went to figure out why. And some of those, a good example is we had one that did that. Every time that happens, we don't move our range that quick. We just say we are not, we kind of say that our range is kind of that 6% max probably. And so we've artificially held those individuals in those positions who saw a 25% bump back until that number tracks several more cycles. And they still might get their 6%, right? They might max out that growth. But we have had some positions where it jumped 25% and that 25% never went away. The next 6 months it grew by 3% and then another 3% and then another 3%. And looking at the market, you start saying it was during this time frame when experienced equipment operators became very valuable in the private industry. And so every city had to fight to keep those individuals employed. And so salaries really went up by 25%. And so once we found there was a story, then we brought that salary range into line with what the data was saying, because there was a reason that we could articulate why it moved so quick. We had one that jumped by 33%, and we said, hold, and the next 6 months it dropped by 25%. And when we went back and looked at the reason why, it was a keying error, right? And so that's why we don't, if something moves so dramatically, we don't move on it.
Do you feel that the data that you have here is accurate enough to be reliable for us to be using reliably to determine our employees' salary ranges or where they are in the market?
I do, in the sense that I have taken this data and compared it to the Utah Right to Know website,
Okay.
Which all of you have access to. If you can look at all the salaries. And I have found, especially as I'm looking at individuals, department heads, where I know it's just one, that this information is so close that it seems to be correct. It's never spot on, because what they're paying them today and what they pay them for the fiscal year is different, because usually, this is going to sound funny, but the Utah Right to Know website says how much did Katie make in 2024, where Katie's salary in January was different than Katie's salary in July, because we do our raises.
Right.
And so it never tracks out, but it's within that margin of error that they track. And the auditor audits those numbers that go into the Right to Know. The state auditor. Not every number, but
Right.
they audit the process, because it's their department that shares it. Katie had a comment, because she's heavily involved in this.
Well, and I'm just going to say, so the cities that don't participate in TechNet, we have a system within our HR group that we communicate salaries and kind of put information together before the budgets for each year. And even those that are not participating in this, they're pretty similar to what our numbers are showing through TechNet.
So, and it's not a perfect system. I mean, but it's, as far as we've been able to, this is the best system we've found. Ogden City just did a full salary study, and I think I'd be shocked if they didn't spend $100,000 to do it, because they have so many positions, right? But they just completed it, and we don't have we haven't asked for their information yet, but we'll get it and just see, because it's always good to know how we compare to the line and that's the neighbors, right? So,
Committee, any questions about what we're seeing here?
The only question that I had is, where do we feel we stand overall? Are we in line? Are we high, low, right where we need to be?
This year we're pretty low. The average increase based on so I didn't talk about the last document we create. The last document we create, we take every individual person, what they're currently making, and look at the average and see how they compare. And then we also input a number that puts them on that scale between the 90% and the 110% on where we feel that person belongs because of their time with the city, their education, or their experience.
So, interrupting, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good.
So is that technically what you would call performance appraisal or not?
Not, it includes it. So good,
Cause that was one thing when you say 3% across the board, then you're taking the person that there's no motivation to do excellent work, cause to me, I mean, civilian sector has always been well, there's some that don't, but if you don't rack and stack your employees, then, you're peanut butter spreading. That was one thing in the military I hated the most, is that the worst captain gets the same pay bump that the best captain does.
yeah.
And it made no sense to me. And so not saying that that's something we have to employ that is extensive as some of the private sector does, because it's a nightmare. But I think at least at some point that needs to be addressed, because peanut butter spreading across 3% just it kind of makes me cringe a little.
No, so that's exactly what we do with the number. But there is a little bit of so if we take a position and say, to get that position from 90 to 100, these are the hurdles we expect them to jump. And sometimes it's time on the job. To get there, you need to be here 4 years, because as a water operator, you can't understand our system until you've had your hands on it for 4 years. For some positions like front office, it might be a 2-year learning curve. So they might jump from a 90 to a 95 to 100 in 2 years. However, there are some components, if they get extra training and certifications, if they get education, bachelor's, master's, things like that, and if there's any discipline, then that can be a negative on their number. And so what we do is, as we look at those individual numbers, Katie and I, and then Dave helps too, is we just try and evaluate, has that person done enough to move? And if they have, then they might get a 2% bump compared to the average, but then the market also moves, and that might equate to a total of, instead of 3, it's 5. And we have employees. We don't have a lot of employees that are over 105%. On that scale, most employees are right around 100. So it's probably, if I was going to group everyone, 60% of our employees are between 99 and 101%, or that's our goal for them, is the better way to say it. And then 30% are lower than 99 because they're still learning their jobs, or they've been poor performers and we're, working with them. And then there might be 10% that are more than 101%.
So I think you said it, but then you skirted some of it, was that you're saying that there's a base that everybody gets, period, and then there's added to it. And I guess my point is that, there's several years in the past that have been 0. And I'm not saying that's even a thought here, but it's one of those things that I think if you don't have the money as a city, I think we're going backwards in the fact of saying that, hey, we have this expense, how are we going to pay for it? And I think that's a little bit off. And I think from a certain point, if we have a good revenue stream that is increasing exponentially every year, hey, let's make everybody healthy. But at the same time, if we're making an expense and not knowing exactly where it's coming from, and we're saying, hey, we got 600K, we got to go figure out where to come from. I think that's a little bit backwards. And I just want to make sure that we understand, at least from staff point of view, is that the base should be also a roving scale, because that's not, how do I say this? Everybody, there wasn't some base thing that we get in civilian world. It's what you get, and it comes out of a pay pool, and you rack and stack, and that's whatever percentage that you land at is what you get. So there isn't a base that everybody gets every year. It depends where you are. So I don't.
Well, and
making sense?
it's making sense because the current one that's in the budget is a 3% minimum,
Right.
10% maximum. And I get what you're saying, is that if there's no money there, then we can't and shouldn't do raises. This just me as running the city. I think that's really hard to do, because the reality is there is money there. It's just, you have to ask for it from the residents. And that's hard. And it's a hard conversation when you're talking with employees and say, we want you to give up the $2,000 a year that you're entitled to, so a resident doesn't have to pay $12 a year. And that ends up being hard.
I'm not excited about the direction you're going with this. Go ahead, keep going.
Well, I'm saying that if we want to keep the type of employees employed at the city, we need to pay competitive rates.
I'm not trying to do that. What I'm saying is that if we're trying to keep up with a city that's doing much more better, but is doing better than us, we can't we're trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, and we have to pay for what we can afford as opposed to paying what other people are paying just to get them to stay. And I know that's a horrible way to say it. And I'm 100% keep the person because it costs much more to find a new one and then train that person again, or that new person. So what I'm saying is there should be a you know, an in-between that we need to come to as opposed to,
I think this is a policy discussion
Yes.
that council needs to have, that this body can't. I mean, obviously,
and we didn't even talk about benefits. too,
we
sorry.
want to keep the best employees, right? But at what cost, I think is a valid question to have. At what point, have we've been in an attract and retain posture for the last half dozen years or so. At what point does that become untenable? Because of, and then that's not that's gonna vary from person to person, but ultimately it's a policy that council has to decide, because they're the ones that approve the purse strings. They have to make that decision on projecting revenues, and then on what are we going to do from a salary standpoint. The recommendation that I wrote down here is one, to make sure that the information on that thing is as accurate as possible. Maybe not just look for anomalies, but to take some time and review it and make sure that you still feel very comfortable with the averages that you're getting, and just ensure that it's accurate enough to be reliable. And then it's off to that policy question about, how much value, what's council willing to spend to keep good employees, right? Understanding that it's not an infinite, there's an end somewhere, and council needs to decide where is that end.
I want to push back on what you said about the employees, what they're entitled to. I disagree with that 100%. I think it's more this, and you said the money is there, we basically just have to take it from the citizens. I'm going to push back on that and say the opposite side, which is we citizens are willing to pay this amount. That's the opposite. So the idea that if you're the city administrator and you're pushing to the employees that they're entitled to this and entitled to that, I don't agree with that. I think you got to consider the backside, which is, again, what do we citizens want to pay? And I had this discussion with several council members last fall, where if we are not willing to pay what you feel is entitlement, then let them go somewhere else. And that will force us citizens to accept that, okay, Brian, my attitude is I'm only willing to pay this. They're going somewhere else. So clearly I've got to raise my willingness to pay. But to push from your position that they're entitled to this, as a citizen, I don't like that attitude.
No, and I get it. I'm trying to manage a city and deal with what is the outfall of losing 50% of our police officers because we won't pay enough.
Agreed.
So I'm making a recommendation, and I'm using the word entitled to because I trust the market number and say that a police officer is entitled to make this as a base minimum. And so semantics on the entitlement word, I think that people should be paid the market rate, and based on the market study, this is the number.
John,
So-
the question, I think, as Phil brought up, the council has passed the philosophy that they will pay at the 50th percentile. And knowing that there's errors in this, that's what I'm at 90%. It's an art more than a science. But right now, the policy is that the employees will be paid at the 50th percentile if they're doing their job and they're up to speed. So based upon that, and frankly, I think you need to disclose this, John, is the real number. If you didn't cap it at 3 and 10, what's happening is people are starting to get behind again. Those people that are performing the job, doing the job, and are at 100% of what the average would be based upon policy, they're starting to fall behind.
Yeah.
The city's been through that once before. Now, what the council decides to do is their choice, but I think they need to understand, because, maybe 6 years ago, the council started trying to catch there for a while, Phil. It was
bad.
I mean, we were paying our officers in the 25th percentile. So we were the training down, right?
And to your
So I
point,
think in full disclosure, whatever the council decides to do, you need to give them the real effect of what you're proposing at 3 and 10.
yeah,
And I think also that terminology matters.
Yeah.
Right? Because I know you well enough to know that the use of the word entitlement really means,
Looking up to the policy.
well, policy, but 50th percentile, right? That it is market rate, right? It's not that they are entitled to in the way we typically use that, right? That you're
Yeah.
saying that market rate would say this is what we should be paying this individual at this job. They're not entitled to it, but if we want to
Deserving of.
keep them in
Yeah.
the job market, this is what the job market, the market rate is saying. I'm not entitled to steak and lobster unless I want to pay the market rate, right?
yeah,
And if I pay the market rate, then I can have that. And I think that's what we're saying here is that the market rate would say, this is where this person should be. They're here or they're above or they're right at it. And that's what we're working at.
and to the mayor's point, we do have some employees who are in the 70 and 80% of market rate right now. And some of that is because the market moved. And some of that is because we have always instituted a cap on the max they can have. And last year we had 12 people who were capped out at the 6%, who are showing up as still significantly underpaid now. And so it's just one of those things that is kicking the can down the road. And anyways,
Well, I would
sorry.
say the interesting thing there, as I told John, I've sat on numerous compensation committees in my career. I have never seen, there were 20 and 30, there were numerous 20 and 30% increases.
Yeah.
Which I have never seen, so
In the market, yeah.
in the market. So I do, in a time when salaries are cooling down, right? So I do think it does merit a second look. But to me, it's the council is the policy that they approve, paying at the 50th percentile with that range of
Yeah.
90 to 110. Is that still the case? If it is, then they have to make the decision, where's the money come from, right? But all you're doing is following the policy, except you're capping it,
At 10.
which starts pushing people back if the numbers are right.
And one other thing, and this is, I think a lot of the employees know this and understand this, but it's not something we really highlight. The majority of these numbers that are in this system were inputted in July of last year. So there's an argument that we're also this number is 12 months behind.
Right.
So it probably accounts for the fact that last year the market moved and this year it might not move as much. But salary is a problem.
Yeah.
We've actually have I don't know who it is at Ogden City, but they've been reaching out to some of our employees saying, oh, hey, I heard North Ogden wasn't doing anything. You're doing 0, so come work for us because we're getting 6%, which is not true.
Yeah, and I guess the other point, and we haven't really gotten to that yet, is the benefits part of it. Because the total package is kind of what we're talking about, because I think we were talking about, was it Pleasant View or something had different, everybody's got different, do they give you health insurance 100% or, is it at 95%? And I think that's something that is telling as well, and I don't know, this is all, we're talking hourly rate, which is something that is one part of it. And to me, if we're doing more than some other cities are, then I think, let's say we can cool our jets a little bit, but there's something in there that says, because we're still looking at the thing from last night, even benefits is going up, every time. So it's one of those things you're kind of like, holy mackerel, what are we, whatever we're doing, it's working to the extent that we're not being a rotation, and that's a good thing. But at the same time, if we have to, start raising taxes or whatever to compensate, I think that's where we need to start going, wait a minute.
Well,
We are 25 minutes away from.
okay.
Are we there?
And we have not done as much analysis on that. We do have some. Right now, I'm aware of one city that they pay 75% of healthcare as an example. We're currently paying 90 to 95, depending on the plan people choose. And then there are cities, in fact, one of the reasons that made an employee leave us recently is that the city they went to pays 100%. So they have 0 out of pocket per month. But anyways, but that is something that we need more information on moving forward because it is part of the conversation. And so we feel like at the 90, we're competitive, but we're not the high or the low right now.
Okay, do we feel like we're at a good spot with the salary study?
Mhm.
Okay. Let's move on then. Item number 2, discuss a contingent budget based on projected revenues. I touched on this last night in my presentation to council, and so we don't have to belabor it here. But the thinking being that preparation, you be prepared. We've all been Boy Scouts or something like that at some point, being prepared. What the indicated with the committee last night is that council and departments ought to be looking at if, let's say worst case scenario, this 9% that we saw for February's numbers down, that holds steady for the rest of the year. That would significantly impact revenues that are available for the budget. I think it would be healthy if all of the departments started preparing, had a contingency plan that if we see a 5% overall reduction, how would that be met? What would we do to accommodate that reduction in revenue? What if it's a 10%? I don't think we need to go beyond that. 10% would, John, what did you say last night? 10% would be $500,000,
Mhm.
which you couldn't just adjust operations to find a $500,000. It would be much more severe, much more austere. 5%, maybe that could be done in program adjustments, those kinds of things. But I think it's healthy to be starting that conversation and have it ahead of time, just in case things don't get better. Thoughts?
I think it's a great
100%
idea.
Mhm.
So I mean, my budget is essentially like 97% salary and
Right.
3% discretionary funds.
Right.
You could, that 5% could be 100% of my discretionary funds, which is all travel and training, any computer related items that we might need, any small equipment, literally anything, public hearing posting notices, your, administrative hearing officer costs, like all of that stuff, right? And so would we, I mean, is that, we can't just say, well, you're gonna get Ryan, Ryan, my planner, I'm gonna cut your salary 5%. Sales tax.
No, and that's why I mentioned that it's a council and department discussion, because that's why the city has saved rainy day funds.
Yeah.
Right? So if there was this continued 5% reduction, is this the time from a policy perspective that council says, okay, you obviously have to have your training, your 3% to maintain certifications and that, same with the water department, sewer and those kinds of things. There are certain things that have to be, and there isn't a 5% reduction that can be done. What can be done, and then is there a dip into the rainy day funds that we've squirreled away for this very purpose, that we then dip into to make that work, hoping that next year is, but I think having that plan of, how am I gonna escape the house when it catches on fire? Am I going out the window? Am I going out that door? If the economy just really kind of tanks, I think it'd be good to be working through mentally, that mental exercise of, okay, well, what could we cut? And it may be that there's nothing you can. But I think we'll recommend that again when we present next time, and it's a policy discussion that council and staff need to have. I think your work session would be a good place for that to occur, and to start thinking through those hard questions. What if?
And we did, like, we had a staff meeting this morning and we talked about this topic.
That's awesome.
And was like, what do we do? For a historical perspective, in 2008, we had a 20% drop in sales tax. And obviously property tax stays the same, because even if houses go down in value, the city gets the same amount.
Right.
But, we, at that point, I want to say sales tax was, I think we lost $300,000. So we were about No, it must have been more than that. Yeah, 20%. It must have been 4. But anyways, and at that point, we bought out some employees. All the part-timers were essentially let go. We eliminated some programs, did a hiring freeze. So if you lost a position, we didn't replace it. I mean, there was a lot of things we did to just make it work. And, you know, within 4 years, the revenues have bounced way back and we were back on track again. So.
I think there's a certain range in which you can make adjustments. But I think the question at hand is, you know, at what point do you dip into the rainy fund?
Yeah.
Versus making adjustments. For instance, you know, Bill, healthcare went through a pretty dramatic time period during the pandemic, right?
Yep.
What they did, they didn't put the whole burden on the employees by any means, but it was shared, and I think that's, you know, there's always a tendency to put it on the employees, right? And Intermountain, deferred their contributions, for instance, to the 401k.
Right.
It's not the pension plan, but you know, that's the situation is, at what point in time do you dip into the rain? Is it, do you think past 5%? Is it 5% or less, you adjust operations, because it does get harder when you get past that 5%, because no one yet that I'm aware of has identified any programs we have to do away with in the city. And at 10%, that's what you start doing. You start impairing services, right? So maybe this committee ought to come up with a list of things that they don't think the citizens would need if it gets past 5%. Because, you know, is it a shared arrangement or is it all pushed down on the employees? I mean, maybe at some point in time, if things really got that bad, you wouldn't plow streets until there was 2 or 3 inches of snow on the street. Or something of that nature. But I've yet to find out anything that has been recommended of programs. But to your point, yeah, if you have a fire now, you have an escape route. But it seems like it's 2 different things. You know, if your garage is on fire versus the main part of your house.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do at 5%, and what do you do if it gets past that?
I
And
think,
it's easier to plan than do it in crisis.
and I think some of it depends on the economy. What are the economists saying? Is this a short term or is this gonna grow to 10 or get worse? I can tell you, and I told Phil this in 08, you know, for the position I had, we all got put in a room like this and we were told to find $48 million and don't come out till you do. And we had cut severely. And some departments like yours, you may not be able to cut a lot more than some of those discretionary. Other departments have more. And I think you just have to look at the whole thing.
Because what happens when things get tight? You have more theft, you have more crime. So do you go out and cut your police department?
Mhm.
I mean, you have to,
Yeah, public
instead of using the
safety,
chainsaw, you have to use the scalpel. Right?
yeah.
Right.
You know, and maybe it's you suspend all capital, suspend hiring, like you'd mentioned with people that leave, you don't replace those positions right away. But I think it's good to have that plan in place so that you don't get caught off guard. We got caught off guard. Granted, that recession was a whole lot worse than anybody ever had imagined it would be. But $48 million was an awful lot of money to pull out.
Can we take that as an assignment with these committee members that in the next week, each of you just
Find $48 million?
No, we're,
one in your bank account, Sandy?
I have a few notes. on
we're
that.
actually, we're gonna turn the meeting off. We're gonna lock you all in here.
No, I think that would be helpful for us, you know, as we present before the work session that the council's going to have in a couple of weeks, what our individual ideas would be of, well, could we save this way? Could we save that way? Now, something that we've talked about in the past, not real strongly, but did with snow plowing. You know, do we eliminate the overtime snow plowing except for the main roads? Do we only plow during work days, during regular work hours, so that we're not paying time and double time, time and a half, those kinds of things for the side streets. And John, you and I had this conversation a few years ago. we'll keep the main roads open. That last quarter mile is up to you to get to your house. And, you know, those kinds of suggestions, whatever you have, if you want to email those, we can compile those and,
I think as we do that, we need to look at liability also,
absolutely.
so that we don't create a liability for the city
Yep,
through some of those cuts.
absolutely.
And because if you look at the difference.
It's never simple.
I don't see it clearly. But in a municipality, your main thing is to provide essential services, right?
Right.
So no one yet has identified non-essential services.
I gotta interrupt, sorry. We have identified non-essential services and it's a losing venture.
What are they?
The pool, the amphitheater, those are non-essential services. We're losing money on those.
That might be what you do at 10%.
Right, so I wanna
At
keep
my
going.
point, you don't do it at 5%, it's temporary, right?
Okay, last night at this council meeting, I thought it was ironic that you guys were talking about hiring a CSO and it's gonna be roughly 80 grand, okay? The numbers that I looked through show the pools losing 80 grand a year, not including depreciation. You told me it's closer to 30. The numbers on my
Yeah, if you
point is
look at
simply,
The full 12-month period, that's what I was told.
Okay. regardless, if we're gonna hire somebody else and we have a non-essential service that's losing money, there's part of it right there as one option. The other thing I thought was ironic was that one of the councilmen, I think it was the Watson, who was hesitant to raise the pool entry fee. I do not understand that. So back to your
I
point,
think you can put that on your list of things that you would cut. And that we
There we go.
forward on to
So,
council.
you
and they
just
can
said
have
there's,
that
we haven't
policy
identified
discussion.
anything. There's one, it's a non-essential service that's losing money that could free up, and it would free up house. I've been surprised at how much energy is put into that, the aquatic center and just talking about it. Think if it was gone, it would free up hours and hours and hours of hassle. There's a non-essential service. And if we're gonna keep it, let's make it break even. There's a suggestion. I'll go to the.
So
council
write it
and tell
down,
them.
email it to us.
By the way, I think
We'll
it's
send it on.
5 years, John, I think it's better having time to break even, because it was somewhat acceptable when it's coming out of RDA funds, right? When it starts coming out of the general fund.
Yeah.
That's a whole different story. Right? Because you can only use RDA funds for certain things. But when it starts coming out of the general fund,
So that's our assignment,
tax dollars.
committee, is, between now and a week from today. So, today's Wednesday, by next Tuesday, send me your list of non-essentials that you would recommend.
Does anybody know what my non-essential list is?
I think we all know what it is, but email it to me anyway. And then we can make that as part of our presentation to the council before they start their work session in a couple of weeks. John, how long is, let's move on. How long is what have you got for us on the fee schedule? Cause we have 12 minutes.
So on the fee schedule, it was really just, we emailed this out to y'all, right? Without any instructions? No, I guess we didn't email it to you. But this is basically every year we go through this, and there's been a lot of talk about what fees need to go up, where can we find a little more revenue? And I would just, and this even goes back to the aquatic center discussion. This is a long document. It's 15 pages, single spaced, but if there are items on here that you are reviewing and just say, it sure seems like we're not charging enough, let's talk about it.
One other thing just that I want to add is like all of the planning fees and building fees, in order to increase them, we have to do a study. We have to understand what our other communities are doing. So it may seem low or it might seem high or whatever it is, high, low, and different, but some of them you have to prove through a study. They're going to affect.
Who's enforcing that? Is it a state thing, federal thing?
It's a state thing. And what ends up being is it's the individuals who pay the fee have the ability to sue. So someone who's gonna challenge our $25 to rent the Bowery is probably not gonna file a lawsuit with the city. More than likely, the areas where we've seen these across the state that the lawsuits come, it's planning and zoning fees. That typically trigger it. Yeah, because you'll have West Jordan gets sued a lot over this. By Ivory Homes. Because they build a lot out there and their engineering fees are high because they have in-house engineers and You know, we've talked about if we were to do this, we would need to do a study to show, hey, here's the cost for the cars, the office, the computers, the time, the benefits, and this is how much you need to pay. And so that's something that in theory under state code, every single fee on this thing can't exceed the cost it charges to provide the service. But to your point, if it's less than $25, like,
What's the threshold? 1,000? 500? And people are gonna sue over
If-
$500?
if we charged business licenses $500, I think you would end up with some sort of not an ACLU, but something like that would come in.
Not,
And-
what else are people suing for? What fees are they suing for?
The only suits I've seen, because it's the only one that cities it's impact fees and engineering and planning.
So most of these fees that are, I mean, you got $10, I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah. my
So,
point is, raise them a few bucks.
well, and that's a perfectly acceptable conversation. A good example is in our business license fees. It's $100 for a new one, $75 for renewal. We generate about $30,000 a year. So if you increased it by $50, you'd add $15,000 of revenue, give or take.
And if
And I
you,
say,
Brian, I
eliminate.
saw you kind of roll your eyes last night when I suggested the room transient tax. Airbnb,
No, why aren't we doing it? I'm paying it in my room down in Southern Utah. Why aren't we charging it?
yeah.
That's why I rolled my eyes.
We should do it.
You know, that's what I asked John to do, is look at all the authorized taxes.
Yeah.
The state sets those.
Back to your business license, John, I texted Phil and said, what's your opinion of getting rid of business licenses? What are they doing? And if you don't have a business license fee, is it more business friendly? And he came back and said he's basically neutral on it. Is that $30,000 that it's generating that beneficial? Is it benefiting the businesses that are getting it? I mean,
to me, it's protecting the citizens.
And some businesses for their, are required by their governing agency at the state to have the city license. So you couldn't eliminate entirely. But there are some that like, home occupations, we don't
Right,
charge a fee, we
right.
still give them a license. So,
So next homework assignment, in addition to the other comments, is to, John, you're gonna email this to us.
yeah, I'll email you the link because it's on the website.
Okay, so email it to us and then to review and comment.
I'm used to it.
I would just suggest that you jot down if there is a fee that you think is too low or too high, or that just needs to be looked at, tell us what page it's on and which fee it is, because that'll make it easy for staff to find. So like if we were looking at water connections, you could say water connections on page 2. And then whatever comment you have it needs to be increased by a couple bucks, or it needs to be done away with, or we need to establish, why don't we have the transient room tax?
I'm stunned we don't have that. Like, I pay it.
Yeah.
Meaning our business pays it.
Yeah.
So. Are there other types of things like that, like the park, the amphitheater that there is no charge for? What else is there in the city that we don't charge for that we possibly could?
So we do charge for all of our parks and the amphitheater and things like that.
Time
For the,
out. Last night you said the new person that wants to do a play, maybe we don't charge them for the amphitheater. You said that.
I did say that last
Yeah.
night, you're correct.
So I think that's.
Why
what
would we
he
not
said.
charge them then?
It's big
We have a
things.
revenue share, right?
So I
Yeah.
think what I said is if they're not charging for tickets, then the council considered not charging for the rental. And I get, you're 100%, like, it's a council level discussion, because staff will charge for a rental, that's what we're required to do. If someone wants it for free, council could consider
And I didn't
that.
mean
It
to be
comes up-
attacking.
No, you're good, you're good.
Well, I do. I go after John a lot. He's
Right.
used to it with me.
That amphitheater's just been a thorn in my side for years, and I just think we have sunk millions into it. It needs to pay back something to
cool.
the city. That just drives
There's
me
non-essential
bonkers.
service.
On
Well,
the
it wouldn't-
amphitheater, what
it
does
would
it
make
cost
a
us a year to maintain that?
It's,
Might
I
reduce
shut it
might
down,
reduce liability.
yeah.
With utilities, and we haven't included insurance in it. I think we're paying. I want to say, we did a study, I think it was 36,000 over 3 years. And in our rental fees, we had generated like 38,000 or something like that. So it was breaking
That is
even at
a
that.
horrible ROI.
What do you
How much did it cost?
You've got some,
In city funds, about 1.2.
And so in 3 years, we made $2,000 on a $1.2 million project.
Yeah.
you've got.
No, it's
capital
true
going.
because, and
1.2
to your
million?
point,
That's what we
we,
said, that's city paid for. They
Yeah.
got to
Oh,
put
okay,
grants in.
okay.
and,
All right.
It was
and,
more than 1.2.
and I know we've talked about this before, but when you look at things that make money in the city, it's your utility companies and your building department. Everything else loses money. Parks, streets,
It's a
Well,
motor
service,
pool,
we could look at, what did we pay for the senior center when we built that back in 2000?
yeah.
Was that what it was? It's always been a senior center?
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah,
know.
it's always been, and so,
Okay.
anybody know off the top of their head what we paid for that?
Ton was donated and we got a federal grant. I think it cost the city 300,000.
Yeah.
And the ground was donated, a bunch of work was
And
donated.
what revenue has the senior center ever generated for the city?
We get some rental.
Get a few $100 a year on rentals.
We can do better than that. Come
I
on,
bet,
folks.
we probably get between 8,000 and 10,000 on rentals.
Okay, on
Yeah.
an
But yeah.
asset that would cost us $4 or $5 million to replace now,
At least, yeah.
at least.
Yeah.
Here's the problem you've got. Make that amphitheater work, right? If that's what the city wants to do, it would take millions of dollars. You gotta get parking lots, you gotta get,
Yeah. There's
that's
a lot.
the issue. So what I call it is, it's the investment, it's sunken, right? It's there.
The
The
sunk cost.
question is, what does it take if you wanna really make it work?
Let's rekindle the amphitheater committee and throw it back on them.
You know, I mean, we just put,
No, I'm gonna throw it on the terrorists that killed the person that was driving that. And that vision died and the drive died with him.
so that's the issue. I mean, you got a sunk cost, right? But there's continual increases to put more money into it. I mean, we put $75,000 into it,
Sound. Light.
sound and light,
Sound and
with
light.
the curtain. I think that was a lot of money, 300,000, right? Cause I remember that on the budget the first year I came in. But the question is, cause your only option is to do the best with what you got. Or cement it over, right? I mean,
Hindsight's 20/20.
right? I mean, that's your option. You make the best of what you got.
Yep.
Or you cement it over. The same thing with the pool, right?
I don't think we're making the best we can though. Raise those fees, make it break even. We can do that.
Well, you sure should do
That's the
that before you
recommendation.
cement it over. You should give every issue.
And
you
that
can.
decision lies with them.
He's here.
But here, did you wanna see how much it made?
Let's do that after, guys. We've got just a couple of minutes here.
Alright,
Anything else from the committee? Sandy?
No, I think I'm good.
was there anybody
You
online?
got your assignments, Mike? You got your assignments?
Yeah.
Any other comments, Mike? Brian? I know you got a lot to say, but anything that we're gonna say right now? You got your assignments.
I'm good.
2 people online.
We have 2 people online, Brenda or Casey. Do either of you have something raised, click your raise the hand button if you have something that you'd like to say?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, apparently, neither has anything. Thank you for attending with us today, Brenda and Casey. Mayor, anything else that you have? Scott? Brian?
No, sir.
Katie? John?
Nope.
Council member?
Oh, that's me, no.
Okay.
Good job, sir.
Then we're adjourned.